welcome to the Australian Space Agency's Student Space Panel on Space and Sustainability in celebration of World Space Week. We're just going to finish a little game that we tried to use to try and stem the crowd, which was, what does my brooch represent? So as we're talking, please continue to provide suggestions in the live Q&A about what you think might be the answer there. But I'd like to begin today's panel with an acknowledgement of country and to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we all gather today. As you can tell, this is a virtual panel. We're dispersed around the country, so we're gathered on many different lands across the nation, and we would like to pay respect to First Nations people and their elders past, present and emerging. And it's a very important part of what the Australian Space Agency stands for. Our First Nations heritage and the incredible knowledge of First Nations astronomers inspired our logo. And as such, it's something that also underpins much of the work we do when it comes to space and sustainability. We have a fantastic panel for you today, and we again appreciate you staying online and ignoring our technical difficulties. I'll run through those who have joined us and then we'll get into the discussion. Joining me from the we'll probably start with myself. My name's Keegan Buzza and I'm the Director of Communications at the Australian Space Agency. And joining me from the agency on the call today to provide the intellect to my waffle is Marie Pellec from our Chief Technology Office. Marie is the Space Sustainability Lead within our organisation. And in a moment, we'll pass over to Marie and give her an opportunity to set a little bit of the scene. But before I do that, I'd like to run through the students who have joined us, our emerging space leaders from around the nation, from within our university organisations. With us on the call is Sophia Lim. So Sophia recently graduated with a degree in mechatronics engineering from the University of Melbourne and is on the Melbourne Space Program Board of Directors. We have Patrick Grave, who's also from the Melbourne Space Program. He is the CEO. Patrick is a mathematics student and education advocate at the University of Melbourne. Ben Jessett joins us on the call. Ben is the co-lead of the Monash Nova rover. So while obtaining his degree in mechatronics engineering from Monash University, Ben led the Monash NASA payload team and co-led the Monash Nova rover team to a national first place and an international second place ranking this year, an incredible effort. We also have James Orman on the call. James is the Administrative Director of UQ Space in Queensland, the leading space engineering team in Australia. We have Chloe Chang, who's the Executive Director of Monash Nova rover. Chloe, welcome. Thank you for joining us. As I mentioned, she's currently completing the 4th year of her degree studying mechatronics and robotics, automation and artificial intelligence. Rebecca Leith joins us. She also from Monash Nova rover is an executive director and is currently completing the 2nd year of a mechatronics and robotics degree with AI also influencing what she studies. Sienna Zubrick from Monash Nova rover, and she's completing degrees in mechanical engineering and material sciences. And we also have Georgia Odland. So Georgia is the Chief Engineer of USID Rocketry Team, studying mechatronics and space engineering and geography. And we also have Murth Snokes, who we hopefully have on the call as well. So let's get into the action and hopefully generate some really thought-provoking discussion today. We've very much asked all of these emerging space leaders to bring their energy and their enthusiasm and very much to bring their unfiltered view of what we can do when it comes to space and sustainability. I probably will take that opportunity to say that everything that gets said today may not necessarily represent the views of the Australian Space Agency, but we're really excited to have a meaningful and robust discussion today about where we are at the moment and where we could head. So I will take that opportunity now to pass to Marie Pellec from the Chief Technology Office from the Australian Space Agency. And Marie, I guess I'd be keen to understand from you what we are doing at the Australian Space Agency and how important space sustainability is to the everyday activities that we undertake in the organisation.
Thank you, Keegan. And yes, sustainability is important for the Australian Space Agency. I think it is very clear from all the documents that we have produced so far. Our strategy has one of the 4 pillars that is about being responsible in space. Our first value in our charter is to be responsible. We have several commitments with international treaties regarding how responsible we will be in space. So yes, it is important to us, and we are working on several things today to make it happen. But I really want to hear from the new generation here, so I might give them the mic first and comment on what we do in response to what they are suggesting. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Marie. And as I mentioned, Marie is very much here today to help provide some context around what we're doing at the Space Agency. But excitedly, I think is also here to hear the ideas and to see what our next generation of space leaders have to say. We're going to pass to Chloe Chang now. Chloe, we'll start with our first question of the panel, and it's a very broad question about space sustainability. And what do you think are the main challenges for space sustainability and us achieving that goal?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting topic, and I think it's really cool to get perspectives of young people, because I think a lot of young people are very passionate about this. I know from an early age, I was very much taught a lot about climate change and how important it is. So, and in terms of like going towards these goals of sustainability, I think it starts with like in government, from a top-down approach, having like legislation around developing these sustainable technologies, enforcing them, and like monitoring all of these technologies that are being developed. And I feel like the Australian Space Agency, on their website, they have like a lot of cool things about their like things that they're doing to try and enforce that. But in terms of like specifically what I think, like just simply like if we're going to make something and push it up into space, we got to think about like the consequences and the impact that will leave. So, you know, how to make this thing, like maybe we could have some limits on the amount of carbon dioxide we produce when we're actually making this thing. What about the materials, like when it goes up into space, you know, after a long time, you know, are these materials going to, you know, affect, like, you know, for example, if we take a rover, for example, to the moon, and currently there are not many rovers on the moon, but what if all the countries in the world wanted to send rovers up there, but, you know, over time they have like, you know, maybe 90 days up there and then they just die and they're there? What's going to happen when every country wants to put a rover there? So I think those are the kind of things we need to think, and just like taking things back. When we put them up there, you know, to explore our curiosities about space, we need to bring it back so that we're not in a way polluting other, you know, cosmic bodies the way that we might be here on Earth. I will leave it there and let some other people speak, but that's me.
Thank you, Chloe. I mean, these are big questions that we're needing to answer because this is uncharted territory for us as humanity. So it's certainly a big question, and there's a lot of places we can take it. Rebecca, I'll pass to you and I guess ask you the same question of what you think the main challenges are for achieving sustainability in space.
Yeah, I absolutely echo what Chloe said. Definitely education and legislation, super important. I think the real challenge is going to be having a unanimous strategy across the entire Earth, because there are going to be various countries wanting to get on board, and as commercialization of space becomes, you know, a lot more accessible, there is going to be real difficulties in all having the same goal and having the same values across our entire planet, because as we add, you know, as Chloe said, more rovers to other celestial bodies, and as we add more satellites to the orbit around Earth, we are going to have more and more out there and more risk of collision and more potential for debris, and exactly having potential issues of if there is conflict across different countries, will that become something where there's defense strategies or potential to destroy the satellites of another country, and that could be really, really detrimental if we are sending defense mechanisms or something like a missile to destroy another satellite. Then we could end up with a really terrible consequence of that. So I think it's all about bringing everyone on the entire planet together to have the same goals, which is just a really daunting, really scary and difficult thing to do. But I'd love to know what the Australian Space Agency are thinking in how they will approach other countries.
Yeah, I might take that opportunity, and thank you, Rebecca, for that really thoughtful response. Take that opportunity to pass back to Marie Pellec from the Chief Technology Office at the Australian Space Agency to perhaps address Rebecca's question there about some of the work that the Australian Space Agency is doing on the international stage. But Marie, any other thoughts that you perhaps have in regards to comments made by Chloe and Rebecca?
Yeah, thank you. It's actually interesting that we heard almost all the aspects that we currently talking about. I heard about carbon dioxide. That's really the impact of what we can do on Earth and in the Earth atmosphere. It's really the impact of launch activities. And for us, it's like the first region where we need to look at space sustainability, the impact on global warming, on ozone layer depletion, on toxicity. All these aspects need to be worked on. It's actually really hard to get data on these impacts, and it is the first work package to really research these impacts to better understand how to fix these issues. And then you have another layer, another region, that is the Earth orbit. And here I heard Rebecca and Chloe talking about congestion, space debris. That's another kind of impact that we also need to address with space situational awareness, space traffic management. And then you have the last layer, the beyond Earth orbit. And here we're talking about exploration, going to the moon, to Mars, and the impacts there are about contamination, waste generation, and also let's not forget the social impact as well. These celestial bodies are sacred for some culture on Earth. So what is the impact there as well? That is forming, these three regions are forming the base of what we're working on right now at the Australian Space Agency, the Space Sustainability Framework. And we're looking at impacts in these three regions and solutions that can be developed, whether it's technologies, regulation, and processes. And yes, I agree with you, Rebecca, this can't be done on our own in Australia. So we are working with our international partners to make sure that we address that globally and in coordination with others. This can't be achieved on our own.
Yeah, thank you, Marie. And you actually, I think, raised a really important point there, and a really fascinating discussion topic, which is that concept of social license when it comes to space. So we're looking at a really significant problem, but this is something that we don't just need to address within the space community, but we actually need to bring the broader community along for this journey as well. Patrick Grave, I'll use this opportunity to pass to you now and to see if you have any thoughts in that regard around that social license and building social license, but again, more broadly back to that first question of what perhaps you think the main challenges are for space sustainability. Patrick, you need to unmute yourself, mate. While we work that out,
I'm good now. I've unmuted myself. Thank you. Yeah, I said some really fascinating things about social license while I was muted there. Thank you all. I might just talk about, say, sustainability, because some people have said some really fascinating things so far. One of them being about kind of space debris, one of them being about this idea of the beyond, so outside kind of Earth's orbit and what waste looks like in that context. I'd like to touch on space debris a little more heavily, because I think it is a huge issue that we potentially face. For one thing, we see a lot more launches happening to very popular orbits at the moment. So things like low Earth orbit, we see many satellites. You've seen SpaceX's Starlink satellites being launched that orbit. And with those more launches and with the debris already up there, we see greater possibility of collision. And the same thing happens with, I guess, these military tests that are happening in certain nations. I think the US was guilty a while ago of doing them. These are called ASAT, or anti-satellite tests, where you kind of send a missile into a satellite typically, and you blow it up and you release a whole bunch of debris. And the problem with debris and lots of satellites and collisions is that it kind of has this multiplying effect. So very small bits of debris in space can do severe amounts of damage to you because they're moving at such high speeds relative to you. So if you kind of explode a satellite and create all this debris, or you collide with another satellite or collide with some debris and create even more debris, then you have this kind of really serious problem, which means that very popular, very useful orbits like geosynchronous, like low Earth orbit, a lot of these orbits are being polluted with debris, just like you might find pollution in the ocean. And that's even more severe for space, because if this kind of multiplication effect starts happening again and again, you get this kind of chain reaction, there's this idea that you'll get what's called Kessler syndrome, which is where basically the Earth's orbits become so polluted with stuff that it becomes almost impossible to launch to space, because it's like a whole bullet field of little very tiny microscopic bullets. And at the moment, as as my colleagues from the Space Agency have said so well, as Maurice said, the thing is that we can remedy these things. We have solutions. We can use techniques like space situational awareness, which is all about tracking stuff in space, and also about, I guess, predicting where it's going to be in the near future. And we can respond to these crises. We can understand what debris there is. We can plan our launches around big debris fields, and we can really implement policies that are responsive to the amount of debris we're producing. And so at the moment, you see the US and the UN has proposed this anti-satellite launch ban. They have support from recently, just as of yesterday, the United Kingdom, from South Korea, from a number of nations around the world. France is supporting. And really, Australia hasn't yet supported this ban, and this is something they really could do tangibly. I don't see our military launching satellite missiles anytime soon, but they really could do more against space debris by promising to ban this, supporting this ban, and placing pressure on our partners to also support this ban, because we want space that is accessible for everyone, that is usable by everyone, and the anti-satellite weapons severely threaten that.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. And I actually think that transitions really nicely into our next question that I'd like to pose to panelists. And Ben Jessett, I'll pose this question to you first. We've talked about the need to bring the global community with us, and that this is a global challenge when it comes to space, and the need for there to be unity in the way that we approach this. But I'm going to bring it a little closer to home. What can Australia specifically do to address the challenge of sustainability in space?
Cool. Yeah. Hi, guys. Thanks for having us on today. Yeah, it's a really good question. I feel like Pat touched on it pretty well, as Beck and Chloe. I think we need just a consistent national approach really towards our space sustainability goals, just making sure that all the states are following a common cause and a common sort of very well-defined goals in terms of CO2 emissions, as well as debris in space, including things like deorbiting procedures, making sure we're following all the national and international regulations on those things, and perhaps we could be even more stringent as a nation on those things for the objects we're putting into space. In terms of what we can do differently to other countries, I think we can definitely develop our own standards as a country surrounding sort of sustainable production of specific missions, and also being really careful and cautious about which missions we select to send to space, and funding and incentivizing specific missions perhaps that address climate change issues and sustainability goals nationally and internationally. And yeah, just being cautious about how we're going about selecting those and funding missions specifically. I think one thing that I haven't seen yet, which I think sounds kind of cheesy, but having like an Australian space program, I think would be a really healthy thing, where we've actually got the government sort of proposing a series of missions to commercial space companies across Australia to get involved in. And I think the goals of those sorts of national space programs could be very heavily focused on particular sustainability goals that we want to meet as a country, and how the space industry can support meeting those goals. And I know one thing in particular is, there are satellites in orbit right now that are measuring greenhouse gas emissions coming from different locations across the entire world, Australia included. So, missions such as that, Earth imagery, missions that are, working on decluttering space, like Patrick suggested. So those missions that are specifically designed to actually address these, like a specific set of sustainability goals, is going to be really important. I think that can only come from the Australian government. And I think it needs to start there. So that was mainly what I was going to say. Yeah, I guess I'll stop there for other people to jump in. That's my comments.
Thank you, Ben. And I'd just also like to point out to everyone that's joined us for today's virtual summit that we do have a live event Q&A. So please interact with us there. I can see your comments that come through. So if you'd like to send through any questions that you have based on comments that have been made by our panelists, please send them through and we can look to pose them to the presenters. Noting as well that we were a little bit late getting started due to our technical difficulties. I will run the panel a little bit later, and grateful to our presenters if they can stay on for an extra few minutes, and certainly for those who are watching, please stay on with us as well. James Allman from UQ, I'm going to pose that same question to you. What can Australia do to be more sustainable in space?
It's a really good question. I think certainly, as Patrick touched on, space situational awareness is something that's really important and something that Australia can be quite capable at, particularly with our remote sensing and operations with all the mining stuff we have, particularly in Queensland. Maybe I'm a little bit biased there, but I think that's certainly an area that Australia can really excel at as we move forward into a more spacefaring nation. I think we can do a lot of other things just around that social license you're talking about being responsible and responsibly launching things into orbit. And for example, going back to the sustainability kind of question, how can we be more sustainable? Using or thinking of space and thinking of low Earth orbit as a resource, the same as water or land on Earth, and being quite conscious and conscientious of not wasting that resource, in that not launching tens of thousands of satellites that aren't going to operate for very long, but designing satellites or things to be in space that can last a while, can be reusable, and have strong decommissioning plans such that they're not left to debris or left to contribute to the Kessler syndrome. I think would be the main kind of steps Australia can take there as an emerging nation without much of a historical precedent for how our space program operates.
Thank you, James. Marie, I'm going to use that opportunity to come back to you, because we're talking about what Australia should and could do when it comes to sustainability in space. As the lead of space sustainability within the Chief Technology Office at the Australian Space Agency, could you perhaps tell us a little bit about what we are doing and opportunities that we're exploring at the agency?
Yeah, thank you. And it's hard because there are so many good, interesting comments here, so it will be hard to address them all. But basically, I heard two main topics here. The first one is the sustainability of space activities. For this one, it's really about, we talked about space traffic management. I think there's also something specific to Australia. We don't have so many assets in space just now. So there is a chance for us to do the right thing from the start or from the beginning of our journey with responsible spacecraft and responsible design and development. For that, we will need, and we have good capabilities here in Australia regarding tools that we can develop with resilient design in mind. I'm thinking things like specific materials that you should use for your spacecraft. I'm thinking the structure of your spacecraft to make sure that you protect the key elements of your satellites so that it can resist an impact, a small debris impact. Things as easy as not putting 2 cables for like the redundancy cable next to the main one, because if this part is the one that is hidden by an object, then it will be smashed anyway, the 2 of them. So these kind of thinking can be put in a tool, and today there are not so many tools that are doing that, or they're a bit old. So there's an opportunity here. I was hearing about incentivize and making sure that we are sending only the sustainable spacecraft in orbit. We are currently working with the Space Sustainability Rating team that is led by Switzerland, the EPLF team in Switzerland. This is a rating tool that assesses all aspects of a spacecraft mission and to make sure that it is sustainable all the way of its life cycle. We are in the advisory board and we are exploring solutions to understand if that's applicable to Australia, to our missions, and if in the future it could become a requirement. So that's for the part of let's be sustainable with our space activities. But I also heard about how can we use space to be sustainable on Earth? And that's another topic. And for that, we have a national space mission that is being developed for Earth observation. So it is definitely one that will support, that will provide data, sovereign data for, let's say, flooding management that is critical to Australia. So here we're really working on how space can support sustainability on Earth, and using existing frameworks like the sustainability development goals is a very interesting one, because we can see how one mission supports different goals that are on Earth.
Thank you, Marie. Sienna, from the Monash Nova Rover program, I'm going to come to you now. And I guess this question sort of builds a little bit on that concept of what we're talking about what Australia can do to be more sustainable in space. But how do we become a leader in space sustainability on the global stage? What opportunities does Australia perhaps have that other more established and entrenched space programs in other nations maybe don't have, that we have, that can allow us to be a leader in this area?
Yeah, so I think that something we do well as a nation is really making most of the unique context and the vast capabilities of all the different states across Australia. So, you know, we have strategy in South Australia, remote ops in WA, manufacturing Queensland, launch in Northern Territory. And something that I think we should continue to do and really put a focus on is, I guess, unify this quilt work of skills, I suppose, while supporting these unique and more localized capabilities. And from that, I think we can really look into sustainability by utilizing local resources and, I guess, understanding the diverse meaning of sustainability nationwide across land and sea and sky. And I think that's what we do well. We value diversity in the field. And when we have so many, I guess, different voices to hear from, we are opened up to all the possible opportunities for growth in the sustainability sector. So I really think that's something that we can use to show as an example to other nations across the world.
Thank you, Sienna. Georgia, from the University of Sydney rocketry team. Same question to you. What opportunities does Australia have to become a leader in space sustainability? I think interestingly for you, given you're in the rocketry team, I think sometimes that can be one of the most contentious elements in space. You know, launching rockets, the view from some people that perhaps it's a frivolous activity. How do we balance that and get people to understand not only the opportunities, but why we launch?
That's actually a great thing you've touched on, because one of the big things that I really think is important for Australia is building the connection outside of engineering and technology, and really connecting with like the wider public and improving their perception of space and what it really is. Because right now, I think a lot of people see space as kind of like this wild west of, you know, people are just launching rockets and launching these giant CubeSat constellations into space and not really having any consideration for the impacts. But if we build greater connections with, you know, science, like areas of science, geoscience, maybe I'm biased because I study geoscience as well, but, you know, environmental scientists, lawyers, social scientists, we can improve the public perception of space, and in doing that, get more of their opinions back to us and build a more rounded picture of like what we can really do. I know that's a bit vague. I think building from that, I think a lot of what we can do is more research into the impacts of all our space operations, manufacturing, and also, you know, end of life impacts as well. Because if you Google space sustainability, like nothing really comes up, to be honest. Like there is such a lack of research, of like a deep research of the impacts of our operations, whether it's, you know, emissions, ozone depletion from rocket emissions, or, you know, the wider Earth impacts of manufacturing materials for satellites. So I think there's a real strength in leading research there, so that the world can learn from us.
Thank you, Georgia. Marie, I'm going to come back to you there, because I think Georgia touches on a really interesting topic, the concept of regulation of space and people's perception of what it takes to be able to launch. And I know that we have the Office of the Space Regulator within the Australian Space Agency. And I know that certainly doesn't sit directly within your remit and what you do at the agency, but I know you work very closely with our space regulation team. Could you perhaps talk us through a little bit around the rigour that goes into deciding whether a launch or a payload is ready to be able to go to space?
Yeah, sure. I am not part of the Office of the Space Regulator, but obviously, when we talk about sustainability, we have to have that as part of the question and the answer. To me, regulation is a very key aspect of space sustainability, just as important as the technology side, for example. We can't achieve that without regulation. And it was interesting when I went to a summit for space sustainability a few months ago in London. I realized that actually our regulation is quite good compared to others in the field. I was surprised to hear that not all countries have a Space Act. I realized that not all countries have in their licensing requirements to have somehow a strategy for debris mitigation. This is something that we ask for in ours, and I think that's clear that we are strong on what we want and don't want to send in space. I do think that there is the regulation can be where we can be strong. We are participating in discussions, international discussions like UN COPIOS, where the long-term sustainability guidelines were developed. Now it's about how we implement them, and a lot of it is about regulation. How do we monitor the sky? How do we make sure that people are compliant with what they said they would do. And actually, when you read reports about space debris, you realize that a lot of issues that are happening right now in terms of fragmentation and creating a lot of debris, if people had done what they said they would do, like passivation of a satellite at the end of its life, well, that would have changed a lot of, reduced a lot of the debris that we have right now. So just checking compliance against our requirement is very powerful. So yes, regulation is definitely a very important part and something where I think Australia is strong. Technologies as well. I think we have good, interesting technologies such as propulsion systems that are using scrap metal, for example. That's definitely sustainable. That's something that we should support, but something as well, just like tools and research, as it was mentioned. To me, there's a lot to explore here, and I think Australia has a card to play here, just because right now, being sustainable can be a really good competitive advantage. And if we use that card well, we could be a very good country in space, not because we are the biggest. I think we are clear that we won't have that spot. It's already taken, but we can be the sustainable one somehow. So I think there's a card to play here, and it would be good for the space industry in Australia.
Thank you, Marie. I know, Rebecca, you would like to comment here as well, but I will come to you. I'd just like to go to the last panelist that we're still yet to hear from, which is Sophia Lin from the University of Melbourne. And Sophia, you're actually coming to us internationally, I understand, from Beijing, where you're doing some postgraduate study. I'm actually going to throw to you, Sophia, a question that's come in from our audience, the Q&A. And considering the question is, considering all the energy spent in launching payloads to space, is there any merit in considering reusability of components for in-orbit assembly of new missions, or augmenting existing missions using parts from other satellites? So that recycle and reuse concept, I think, is there something there that you'd like to add, but also more broadly to the question of what Australia can and should be doing?
Thank you for that question, Keegan. I think it's a really interesting question. I think that space provides a really challenging environment for reuse of things such as satellites. Like, I know that with satellites, we're seeing a lot of development in terms of, like, you know, the focus is around like active debris removal, like removing satellites from, you know, active orbit to a graveyard orbit, so it's not kind of cluttering up the active orbits. We're seeing things like in-orbit servicing in terms of prolonging the kind of lifespan of our satellites, so that we get more use out of these satellites. So I think, in my experience, I think the dialogue in the international scale around, you know, reusable satellites is more directed towards making them last longer and making sure that once they do finish their end of life, they either re-orbit into the atmosphere so that they're not cluttering up that Earth orbit, or they're kind of moved to a graveyard orbit, so they're also not kind of using up that space. So I think, like, I definitely have, I don't want to say that that's like not a possibility, especially because, like, you know, with the kind of advancements in technology that we are seeing, like, absolutely, I think maybe it will be a possibility in the future, but I think that's kind of more the dialogue around rocketry and less so around satellites. I kind of also wanted to add a point about the kind of space sustainability rating as a kind of, you know, strategy that Australia can implement. The World Economic Forum this year released something called the Space Sustainability Rating, where companies can voluntarily apply to have their kind of processes audited and receive a rating on how space sustainable they are. And I think something I'd love to see across Australia is, like, you know, a big uptake of this kind of rating. You know, I know that a lot of our spacecraft operators and satellite manufacturers are able to, you know, apply to have this rating done and this audit done. And, like, why not? Like, this is fantastic. We can have that kind of transparency and set that kind of, like, you know, positive leadership in across the world by, you know, uptaking this and really putting it at the forefront of our expectations for space industry. So I think that's something I would love to see moving forward.
Terrific. Thank you, Sophia, and thank you to that question coming in from our audience. And again, I just encourage you, we've probably got just under 10 minutes to go until we'll need to wrap this up on midday daylight savings time. But please put in any additional questions that you may have from the audience. Rebecca Leith, I'll come back to you because I know you're quite keen to touch on the education piece around all of this, and that's quite interesting to me as the Director of Communications and also having the Inspire pillar within our remit at the Australian Space Agency within the teams that I'm responsible for. How do we get the public to come on this journey with us, and what do you think is something that we can do as part of that education pipeline to sort of start achieving what we're talking about today?
Yeah, thank you. This is something that Georgia mentioned that made me, you know, spark something within me because I'm doing science and engineering, and in my science degree, it's really prominent and important. The pillars of science of having empiricism, rationalism, and skepticism. If you're a scientist, you'll know those words well, and that's something that I haven't found as much in my engineering degree. It's not thought about how much, you know, PLA we're printing every day. And in my science degree, you know, there's every single time I take off my gloves, if I'm in a wet lab, you know, there's this conscious, another pipette tip in the bin, another pair of gloves in the bin. And, you know, these tiny little things which have come from within me. And I know that as all these, you know, young people here would know this exact feeling from when we were in primary school, being taught about sustainability and, you know, all these renewable energy sources that are so available to Australia, and yet there's still so much not renewable sources being used instead. And so that really, I think, is so important that this generation is being brought up with this mindset where everything we do has, you know, that voice in the back of your head about sustainability, and bringing that even further to bring that into the space sector and into the next generation, to have them understand, you know, really consciously in whatever workforce they enter into the industry of space or something separate, to have that in the back of their head and to understand, like we do, is just so important to know that, you know, we are all on the same page, as we were speaking about earlier. So I think that's something that, you know, all Australian schools from primary school age need to bring in. We need to have a huge program to teach all of these things about what we can be doing and what's been done in the past, and bring up the mistakes that may have been made too. I'd love to know if anyone else on the panel, you know, feels this too.
So we have 5 minutes left, and I think what you've touched on here, Rebecca, is something that I'm really keen. I'm going to go big picture here because we've been talking in quite a bit of depth about technical elements, about what we can be doing on the global stage. There have been a lot of very vocal and very public critics of space exploration in the last little while. Prince William joined the list when he said that we should be looking at addressing problems here on Earth rather than looking to explore space. And I think for us at the Australian Space Agency, and certainly for me as Director of Communications, it's a great challenge that we face, getting people to understand why space matters. And I think sustainability is very critical to that. So I'm going to go around the group and just ask you in 30 seconds, and please keep it tight because I'm conscious of wrapping this up. What is one thing that you think we could be doing to get the public on board with us when it comes to space and really establishing that social license for the work that we do? I'll start with you, Georgia.
That's a challenging question. Education is huge, Rebecca. I completely agree with you. Yeah, I just think bringing space back down into the public, and also telling people that it's not just about what goes up. It's actually, we're contributing to a lot of research back on Earth, like Earth observation is huge. and that contributes to so much climate research and land management research, and even like understanding the impacts of space itself. Like Earth observation satellites play such a huge part in that, and if we can tell the public that and show them the work that is happening at the end side of our space operations, then maybe they can really understand why we're doing this.
Thank you, Georgia. James, posing the same question to you. 30 seconds, one thing that we could do to generate that social license.
I think the main thing that we can do to make space more, or make people more excited about space, is just make it more accessible. As UQ Space, we go around to a number of high schools and do outreach activities with high school students, and the sense of wonder I think that space really generates is absolutely fantastic, and probably quite close to a completely universal thing, certainly if you look at all the cultures across the world. So just introducing more people to that and making people realize how cool space is really, I think would be a good first step there.
Terrific. Sienna, same question, 30 seconds. What do you think we can do?
Yeah, I think the things like Earth observation are really important in helping us understand how our actions impact the Earth, but I think it's also important that we show people how space can actually have a preventative role in climate effects. And I think space technology is something that is founded on the principles of efficiency and self-sufficiency. You know, how do we build and transport things more efficiently? How do we power things over and over again for years of operation? And importantly, how do we sustain life efficiently? And I think that these lessons learned, which we can share with the public, they're lessons learned through necessity, and they can only have positive effects to the way that we do things back on Earth. How do we harness energy? How do we operate as a society? And how do we not take our resources for granted?
Terrific. Ben Jesset, same question to you, 30 seconds. What do you think is one thing that we could be doing to develop that social license?
Yeah, no worries. Just really quickly, yeah, I think it would be National Space Program, make it super ambitious, make it super exciting, make the goals of the program super relevant to people on Earth, either through, like Sienna said, like climate change or something that just matters to the people, and make it big and make it exciting, and show very clearly how the Australians are involved in that project and what actual Australians are doing in Australia to contribute to that, whether that be our own like completely Australian project or how we're collaborating with other international companies to accomplish these meaningful goals. That's all from me.
Terrific, Ben. Patrick Grave, same question to you.
Yeah, thanks, Keegan. Well, I think people are very cynical, and rightfully so, about how we're using space. And I think a lot of people are. Like, you see billionaires launching rockets just to try and get an edge up on each other, it seems. You have countries using space as a vehicle to test weapons and to kind of assert power against each other. And you know, I think it's right to be a cynic. But on the flip side of that, you also have, like, we've had GPS satellites for many, many years. We've had weather satellites for many, many years. And I think, for me at least, highlighting the technologies that come from space, highlighting the benefits that, yes, there are Australians kind of on the moon, and that's really cool and wondrous. But, you know, Joe Bloggs needs to know what is happening from space, like what is affecting his life tangibly, realistically from space, and highlighting those in the best ways we can through our education systems, through our media, highlighting the benefits, the real benefits that Earth has seen from space and continues to see from space research is paramount to gaining that social license and continuing to support the exploratory R&D kind of out there moonshot ideas that the space agency and all space agencies are working towards.
And Sophia Lynn from the Melbourne Space Program, your thoughts?
Thank you. I think I agree with a lot of what has been said by the panelists. Like, I think profoundly it's an advertising issue. It's the fact that people don't know that, you know, methane sat, GHG sat are monitoring greenhouse gases. They don't know that, you know, IoT satellites are providing real-time agriculture decision-making data all the time, improving our systems. They don't know that, like, you know, Earth systems, like Earth observation satellites, like, you know, panelists have said, are monitoring water cycles, forest cover, tracking ships in illegal fishing. I think a huge part of this is the dialogue around satellites and, you know, space in general has been about exploration. And what we do need to see is from, like, you know, a higher level, from our politicians, from our researchers, acknowledging and really advertising the role that space has in terms of addressing climate change and all these existing fundamental issues on Earth. Things like how satellites have been used in terms of monitoring the war situation in Ukraine. There is a fundamental role that space has in our modern day life, and it goes unacknowledged. And I think that's something that does need to change from all levels of society, from journalists to politicians to scientists. And, as the Australian Space Agency, I think I'd love to see as much advertising as possible about the role that, many panelists have said, that Australia plays as well.
And Marie, I'm coming to you last. At the Australian Space Agency, and we've had some incredible conversations ourselves about this very issue. What do you think is one really simple thing that we could do? I know there's many, but just one and 30 seconds.
Yeah, I don't know if I will pinpoint one, but I think what has been said here is really valuable in terms of, yes, we have a PR issue. We need to be clearer on what is the benefit from space to Earth. We talked about the data, the services. That's one thing, but there's something that is even less tangible for people, things like exploration and astronauts in the ISS, for example. I was amazed when I had my first child to realize that the baby milk powder is actually thanks to astronauts. So people need to know that many things that we have today here on Earth is thanks to space. But once we have sorted that issue of making it clear that we need space on Earth, I think we also need to use the learning from Earth in space for sustainability. There has been a lot of work on sustainability on Earth that we can reuse for space sustainability. Things like reduce, reuse, recycle, things as easy as that can be done in space if we can. If we can't remove a rover from the moon, maybe we can have parts that can be reused for other things. So that's something that we have to look into, and there are great tools, approaches from Earth that we can use.
Terrific, thank you, Marie. And I would note that there are so many points there and so many valuable contributions. Also have some great contributions that have come through on the Q&A about this issue, including citizen science and the role that can play, winning friends among the public, as this person's put in the Q&A. And I would note that as part of World Space Week, the Australian Space Agency, we've got an infographic series every day putting out a different way that space helps us achieve sustainability here on Earth, and that's just the tip of the iceberg of the story that we can tell. I will quickly talk to the brooch because there was a lot of comments in the Q&A about what the brooch perhaps represented. No, it is not a piece of space junk, as my husband so graciously suggested this morning. It's actually an abstract native flower, but I thought that it struck me as a bit of a light bulb, a colleague of mine said. So I thought it was very appropriate for today, the great minds of our emerging space leaders. And I'd like to very much thank all of the young space leaders that we've had on today from our university sector, giving us your time and really contributing today to a meaningful conversation about what we can do to achieve sustainability in space, to use space to make the Earth more sustainable. Also, thank you to my wonderful colleague Marie Pellec from the Chief Technology Office at the Australian Space Agency. Marie and the team and across the entire agency, there's terrific work that's happening to look at this very issue and to have Australia be at the forefront of global efforts to address sustainability in space. So thank you again very much for joining us. I know it was a rocky start with some of the technological issues, but we're very grateful for you joining us. World Space Week isn't over. There are other opportunities to engage with us, so please jump on the Australian Space Agency on our social media channels, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook and Twitter, to see the other ways that you can get involved for the remainder of Space Week, including this Sunday. Our leading space historian and one of our agents, Kerry Doherty, is hosting a wonderful Q&A with the team that built Australis Oscar 5, so the first ever student satellite that was put into space from Australia many, many decades ago. So thank you again. Really appreciate you joining us and look forward to the next time we get together to do something like this. Have a great day.